Hi everyone, it's Don and I hope you're having a fantastic day. Well, some passengers are now saying the cruise line, yeah, they're hiding something from us. So I recently reported how we were supposed to have the very first cruise ship sail to Canada, the Caribbean Princess, and with 4 days left in their cruise, Princess decided they needed more time, they said. They needed more time to bring the ship into dry dock to get that ship up to its standards. And at the time I said, yep, that makes sense because I had heard reports of some problems on the ship, like bathrooms backing up and things like that. So if that was the case, I could see why they would want to go in and make sure everything's back to normal before the busy Alaska season, etc. However, now, and also when they canceled it, they were still in the United States when they canceled it. They dropped everybody off, they gave everybody their money back, and they gave everybody a future cruise credit. But there's more now to the story. Passengers are now coming off on board and reporting to the news media saying that there was a lot of COVID on the cruise ships and that passengers were scheduled to be tested, and when they showed up to get their test, Princess said, no test, it's been canceled. Then they let everybody off to fly home from the cruise port. And that means, if you think about it, that means that everybody who is getting off, if you're going back to Canada, you don't need to get a test. If you're flying from one city in one state to another city in the United States, you don't need to have a COVID test to fly. And so passengers were being let off and jumping on the general populations, putting everybody at risk, they said in some of these reports. And they were talking about how there was a full floor that was completely blocked off with the amount of COVID people on board and things like this. So let's delve into this. Now I am going to admit, and I'm going to look at both sides of these stories because I do not want cruise lines to hide anything from us whatsoever. They should be transparent and open, etc. But you see what happens when anything comes out about COVID on a cruise ship, the news media jumps all over it. There's probably 14 news stories that I read this morning alone saying passengers claim lots of COVID on that cruise ship. And their source is 2 people. 14 stories, 2-person source. I'm not saying they're lying. I'm just saying it's funny how they just jump on the story no matter if it's 1 person or 1,000 people saying it. But before I tell you the possible logic behind the Princess doing some of this stuff, let me just invite you to hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. Again, it keeps you up to date with all things cruising, including stories like this where you don't have to rely on the media hyping things out to make it sound like the worst case scenario every time you read a news story or a headline. And instead, you can make your own informed decisions by hearing both sides of the possibilities. Just hit the subscribe button. It doesn't cost a thing. It really, really does help the channel out, and I'd really appreciate it. So first of all, let's go with the cruise line closing off a floor and as a COVID ward. Well, that has been part of the protocols now for months and months and months, to have designated cabins on a particular floor. They close the gates at the elevators and they block it off so there's not people walking up and down a corridor of places where they're going to put people who have COVID. That doesn't mean all those cabins have people in them. There could be 1 person or no people on board. I've seen that floor blocked off on numerous cruises I've been on now. Then they were stating there were numerous people in their cabins on board who have COVID as well. And that's the reason that they were shutting down the cruise early. And I'm thinking you could say that could be a very distinct possibility, considering this was going to be the very first cruise ship to arrive in a Canadian port and you have to test everybody before they arrive. They didn't. They didn't have to test everybody before you arrive. You no longer have to test to get off the cruise ship in Canada if you're a vaccinated passenger. So they didn't have to do it that way. But they do have to test because the cruise was a certain length of time. And after 7 days, they're supposed to test people on the ship. Anything longer than a 7-day, 8-day cruise. That's been the procedures. So it's highly possible that the scheduled test that was canceled by the cruise line was canceled because they no longer fit that description of the longer cruise because the cruise was cut short. That's a highly possible reason. Plus, they were no longer arriving in a foreign port for anyone to fly home. Another possible reason. So there are logical explanations of why people might suspect that there was a ton of COVID on board. It doesn't necessarily mean there was. Now, if the cruise lines are hiding this from us, that's kind of dirty pool. I would not like to see this. I don't want to see, if you have an outbreak, just admit you had an outbreak. Nobody has been put, have you heard any stories from anybody on a cruise right now of anybody being put on a ventilator? No, you hear mild symptoms, asymptomatic, no symptoms, flu-like symptoms, and people are either isolated, quarantined, or flown home to finish their quarantine at home. It's an inconvenience now, as opposed to seeming to be life-threatening at every turn that was in the early parts of the pandemic. So again, are they hiding anything? Not necessarily, because there are logical explanations. Did they decide to cut the cruise early so they could go into dry dock because they have problems on the ship? High possibility. Reports came in that there were problems on the ship. Is there a possibility they canceled the testing because they no longer had to do the test because the cruise wasn't so long and they were getting back off in a U.S. port? Nobody had to fly home from a foreign country back into the United States. Yes, it all makes logical sense. Does that mean that's what happened and the passengers are wrong? No, but people are jumping to the conclusion that there were hundreds and hundreds of cases of COVID on board of a passenger ship with 1,600 passengers on the ship. I just needed to say that, hey, look, there can be COVID. There's going to be COVID. There's COVID in my pharmacy. There's COVID in my bank. I go to my bank teller and that I see every day. And 2 days ago, she wasn't there. And I said, oh, she has a day off. She said, no, she has to quarantine because she had COVID in a bank of 9 people. So yes, COVID can go anywhere. It's not going to not show up on a cruise ship. The cruise ships are doing their best to mitigate as much as possible, but the media headlines, boy, are trying to make it seem like they are possibly hell on earth when you go on a cruise. And it just shows you there's more to the story every single time. Does that mean what the passengers say is wrong? Not necessarily. Does that mean what the cruise line has said was wrong? Not necessarily. Judge for yourself. I'm going to judge by, I'm still going to cruise because I've been cruising 12 cruises now and I haven't caught it. And if I did, I didn't feel it. I know people who have caught it. I know people who suffered from it. It's my choice. And everybody out there now has to make that same choice. Don't let the media tell you what to do. Don't let me tell you what to do. Make your own informed decision. Just remember, there's always 2 sides to every story. Well, I hope you appreciate this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. Want to see more tips, more tricks, more travel blogs from around the world? Hit that subscribe button. Till next time, have yourself a safe and a great vacation.